Hello and welcome to another episode of Ask the Expert, the series presented by the Alumni Relations team at Queen's, in which we speak to experts from across the university on a range of subjects and give you the opportunity to ask your key questions. Today's episode will be marking Loneliness Awareness Week, and we'll be speaking to Dr. Brent Thompson from the School of Psychology on the issue of loneliness and what we can do to combat it. Good afternoon, Brent. It's great to have you here with us to speak on what I'm sure everyone agrees is a hugely important issue. Could you perhaps start by explaining a little bit about your wider work and your areas of study, please?
Hi, Andy. Thanks very much for inviting me along to speak today. Hello, everyone. My name is Brent Thompson. I work as a lecturer in Queen's University on the Doctorate in Clinical Psychology course in the School of Psychology. And I also work as a clinical psychologist within NHS mental health settings.
Thanks, Brent. As I say, it's a hugely important issue, loneliness, and I suspect that the current lockdown and pandemic has done a lot to exacerbate that for an awful lot of people. At this stage, I'd like to open up the session for questions from the attendees, but to get the ball rolling, I have one of my own, and it's as follows. As I say, loneliness is often said to be one of the key social issues of our time. Exactly how serious an issue is it, and why is it important to do what we can as a society to combat it?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I think you've already raised a few very good points, that this is Loneliness Awareness Week, but also in a time of lockdown in COVID-19 and the additional effects of that as well. Prior to lockdown, loneliness has always been an endemic within our society, so it has. It's a very highly prevalent thing that people experience. We think some research has shown us that occasionally most people will experience loneliness, maybe 80% of people, whereas around 15% of people would experience more chronic loneliness. So they would, with maybe about 5% of people saying that they don't experience loneliness at all. But I think everybody at this time has certainly maybe experienced some loneliness or a degree of social isolation under the current context. So why is that important for society? Well, loneliness within the literature has been linked with lots of different things in terms of, thinking about the impact it has on health, our physical health. And there's been documented in the literature that loneliness can affect things like stress within the general population, health concerns, including cardiovascular conditions, cholesterol, all sorts of different things. So this is a very important issue that we discuss.
Indeed it is. And you mentioned there social isolation. Is there a differentiation between loneliness and social isolation?
Thanks, that's a good question. Quite often they're used synonymously. People use them as both one and same thing. I'd say social isolation could be more a kind of a sort of a physical construct where you might not be in contact with other people, whereas the experience of loneliness is more of an individual subjective feeling that we might experience. So loneliness may or may not be a pathological or a bad emotion to feel. It's not always negative, so to speak, but more often it's a very painful experience. And when we talk about loneliness as well, we have to think about, what is the nature of that loneliness for the individual with their individual meaning of that. So is it a fleeting experience that somebody has, or is it more something pervasive, more chronic? And the chronicity of the loneliness that's felt by the individual is a is where the problem lies. You know, I would say it's normal to experience loneliness from time to time, but if it's all the time, chronic, then when you start thinking about then how can that impact on people's quality of life, and also their mental health as well, and their physical health. And as I said, that has a very individual meaning for the person who is experiencing that, and that can come from a perceived discrepancy in, you know, the relationships we would like in our life, the relationship that we want, the relationship that we wish for, versus our perception of the relationships that we have. So again, just to underline the point that loneliness has a very individual meaning for people.
As I suspected, this is an issue that I think that one of those things that people would like sort of practical guidance with, particularly in what they can do to help those around them. And a couple of questions that have come in so far certainly touch on that. So how can we spot the signs of loneliness in friends and family? And what's the one key thing we can do to help those people that we think are suffering from it?
Mm-hmm. It can quite often be a difficult thing to spot, both in ourselves and others. As I was saying there, you know, about the individual meaning that has for somebody, that has to be thought about, it has to be spoken about. So certainly one thing that we would encourage with loneliness, it seems fairly obvious, is to talk to one another, to ask, to inquire really about what's going on with that other person. Do they feel lonely? To what extent do they feel lonely? And that would be a kind of a key point with that. So it will, I mean, we have to, you know, again, think about loneliness with another person, and that can be very helpful just in terms of connecting with that other person and staying connected with one another and increasing our relationships with one another as well.
And I use the sort of word taboo subject in want of a better phrase, really, but it can be one of those things where you may, you know, suspect that, for example, an elderly next door neighbour is suffering from it, but it can be a difficult subject to broach. I mean, you know, asking someone if they're feeling lonely. What would you say if you suspect that someone like a neighbour or a family member is suffering from loneliness, but you're feeling a little bit perhaps coy about broaching the subject with them? Is there any guidance that you could potentially give to people on how to do that?
I think, you know, there's always the myth that if we bring something up with somebody else, we can kind of create it in them. Or if we're asking about loneliness, if we ask a neighbour, an elderly person, do you feel lonely, that somehow we'll bring their attention to this and, oh no, they'll feel lonely. And that isn't the case at all. You know, people will know if they're lonely or not, and asking about that won't make them lonely. In fact, it'll have the opposite effect. It'll make them feel less lonely just by that simple inquiry. But the thing about loneliness is that it is very endemic in society. It's difficult to kind of get a profile of who may feel more lonely than someone else. Certainly older adults, elderly people are maybe one group that would feel maybe a bit more lonely than the general population, and also younger people as well. But again, research in that area shows that most people feel lonely. And again, it's kind of about assessing that chronicity of that, or what is the distress that's caused by this loneliness for the person.
As you've sort of mentioned there, and in terms of sort of elderly people and it potentially being something that we link to older people more, particularly in connection with the current lockdown and the last 3 months. One of the questions here certainly touches on that. I worry about my elderly parents. Although they have each other and we try and visit, I sense they have a real feeling of loneliness. given the fact they cannot see or hug their grandchildren. Are there specific recommendations there that you would give?
I mean, it's a very, very difficult situation, you know, because there is just that physical isolation, that inability just to be close to each other in the physical kind of way. And, you know, certainly what we would encourage is to kind of use the resources that we have at this time, such as video platforms, using that as often as we can, staying connected, you know, and just really kind of being in contact with that person. The thing about it is that, you know, it's about the perceived discrepancy within the person, as we call it in psychology, between the relationships they want versus the relationships they have, and how this can then lead to distress in that. So again, it's about kind of talking about relationships, and through talking to each other, we can have a perspective shift in how we might view our relationships, or how we might view our relationships as going. So certainly that's one of the benefits of talking, is we can get ideas about ourselves back again, which may lead to then a shift in how we feel and how we experience our own loneliness.
One of the other questions that came in a short while ago touches on previous question. It asks, you can feel lonely even when surrounded by people. What therefore causes loneliness? And I take that as meaning perhaps as a mental health condition. Are there specific things that can perhaps trigger it?
Yeah, you know, I think that's a great point. So it is, in terms of, you can feel lonely in the crowd, and you can feel lonely by yourself, and vice versa. And it really comes down to kind of, you know, how do we understand loneliness? Where does it come? What does it mean for us psychologically? And, you know, we are born into relationships. Everybody knows that human beings are social creatures. We interact with each other from day one, and very much that's about getting various different things in terms of a sense of security. From when we're very little, we form attachment relationships with our parents, with our caregivers, and that gives us that sense of security. But also then this allows us to develop and psychologically grow as well, and gain a sense of ourselves. And this is very important when we're thinking about loneliness, because loneliness can take two forms. One is interpersonal loneliness, which means, you know, how we relate to other people, but also intrapsychic loneliness as well, and that's how we relate to ourselves as well. And things to kind of look out for on that is, you know, perhaps when it's, you know, relating to other people, is there some issues or difficulties for us in terms of, you know, self-esteem, self-confidence, and thinking about ways to kind of combat that and deal with that, but also thinking about how we relate to ourselves, which is very important in terms of, are we maybe a bit self-deprecating? How do we you know, relate to ourselves? How do we view ourselves? And then how do we then form some self-compassion towards ourselves, and allow really for these emotional experiences that we're encountering, and tolerating those. So I'm not sure if that's answered your question, Andy, or...
No, I think it has. I think it has. Yeah, thank you. Certainly over the last few years, I have noticed increased awareness about loneliness. Do you think loneliness is becoming an increasing issue, or is there just more work being done to raise awareness of it? Because although there are more ways for us to stay in touch with each other, people's lives are becoming ever more hectic and busy. So essentially, do you think it's becoming a bigger issue?
It's difficult to say whether it's becoming a bigger issue, or whether, yes, we are simply more aware of that. So we are, I certainly think that, you know, we as a society do need to keep checking this. in terms of, yes, our busy lives getting in the way. What are we kind of doing to, to combat that and to connect with one another in meaningful ways? It's quite easy just to get into two ruts of, work, home, and get stuck in negative cycles. So I think it's about kind of breaking that cycle, but certainly, the research is showing the effects of loneliness that is detrimental to our quality of life and mental health.
Often, when we talk about loneliness, it's in connection with sort of recognizing it in other people. And you mentioned something quite interesting earlier there, which I think I've got the right gist of, that there can often be sort of, perhaps other underlying mental health issues that can trigger loneliness. What are the sorts of things that we can do to sort of help ourselves and maintain our own good mental health? I suspect there are many, but are there kind of key basic steps that you think people can follow?
Well, this is the thing. Loneliness and mental health problems has a very cyclical relationship, in that you can feel lonely and then have some mental health problems in relation to that, maybe anxiety, depression, self-harming behaviors, etc. But also then having mental health problems can lead you to feel more lonely and more isolated as well. So it is good to kind of think about, how do I break that cycle? How do I tackle that? How do I get in contact with my own loneliness? And certainly on the QUB website, a colleague of mine, Chris Graham, from the School of Psychology, has provided some information on curbing loneliness as well. And again, we would talk about staying connected and talking to others to kind of get a sense of what's going on for us, but also to get a sense of what's going on for us in relation to other people as well. If we're not talking, we could think that a problem's very big, very catastrophic, very overwhelming, and then through talking to somebody else, we might see that in a different light, or think about that in a different way, or have some new ideas. In terms of maintaining good mental health in general, the Public Health Agency has a Take 5 leaflet, which is easily accessible on the web, so it is, and it promotes a lot of things that would be recommended to deal with loneliness for general mental health, in terms of just connecting with others and just the importance of talking. It's good to talk, and quite often we don't talk about feelings, and it might be very difficult at the minute as well. In the current pandemic, there might be lots of different emotions that we're going through, which are all normal. There might be anxiety, and sources of anxiety from the news or social media creating anxiety in us, maybe feeling angry about being, so restricted at the minute, and the kind of restrictions imposed on our lifestyle. Equally, maybe feeling a bit excited by all this as well, that there's lots of different things going on, and this could lead to unhealthy behaviors, or feeling panic or shame, whatever it might be. So it's important to kind of reflect on feelings are normal, that these are normal things that happen within us, and to try and break those cycles, maybe through talking or doing exercise, also curbing your expectations as well, and not putting high standards on yourself, and developing that self-compassion. That this is a very difficult time. Loneliness prior to the pandemic was a major difficulty, and continues to be now, maybe even more so. But also the importance of having a routine in all this as well. We can feel rather rudderless in all this, and that our normal kind of routines, going to work or social activities, might be taken off us temporarily anyway. So it's the importance of kind of getting a good routine and sticking to that, and also just engaging in healthy behaviours. There's some concern about alcohol consumption under lockdown, and that can be a response to loneliness as well. of those difficult feelings to kind of acknowledge within ourselves and share with others. And I think something important in that is, again, kind of back to, you know, loneliness is a normal feeling. We all feel it from time to time, and that's okay. It's okay to be lonely sometimes. However, it's just rather that if that gets too chronic for someone, or goes on too long, or just really creates too much distress, that services are available out there as well, mental health services, which can be accessed through your GP. So there's a list of things that I've said there that you can kind of, you know, do for yourself to try and maintain your mental health. But also, if you feel like they're not enough or you're struggling too much, again, don't struggle by yourself. Go and get help from services.
There's been a couple of questions come in that certainly touch on what you've just mentioned, particularly about support organisations. Someone asking about what specific organisations are there, but before you answer that, it does tie into a question that, well, more a comment actually that we've had from an international student who says that they have no family in Northern Ireland, and they often feel that they're from the Middle East as well, and because of the language barrier and the fact that they look different, they sometimes notice that, you know, people give them strange looks, and they can find it very difficult to approach people. They can often spend days without talking to anybody. That seems like quite an extreme circumstance. Is there anything practical that you got, sort of guidance that you could give to that person?
That is a very difficult situation for that person to be in. From the practical side of things, again, I'm aware that the Postgraduate Centre does offer forums, and I would assume that there are online forums at the minute as well, but I'm sure when restrictions lift, there will be more physical forums, as it were. So that might be one port to kind of check out that there as well as Student Guidance Centre as well, for kind of local supports within the university here. There may also be something in contacting their country's embassy here in the country as well. There may be some kind of support group within that embassy, or some sort of way of connecting people from that country here and over here as well. So that would be something that I would kind of think of. Again, online, there's lots of different website support forums, including marmalade.org, who have a wealth of resources there, and who are behind raising awareness for loneliness on Loneliness Awareness Week. So they would be a few avenues that again I would check out, and also if that becomes, again, I would say, too much or too distressing, with also kind of taking behaviours on, like routines, trying to maybe ring friends and family back home, that type of thing. Services are available, and I could have a conversation with their GP.
Thanks, Brent. And I hope to the person that asked that question that they've found some level of reassurance in that. If you have, specifically to that person, if you have anything else to ask Brent during this session, then please do ask. Earlier on, I asked about sort of whether it's become a more prevalent issue, loneliness, and particularly sort of adverse mental health. And one of the questions we've had touches on that. Do you think the increased use of social media has had a positive or negative impact on loneliness, especially within the younger generation?
Mm-hmm. Very good question. I think it's always worth clarifying differences, because if you're using something like Zoom, Skype, FaceTime, sort of a video call, I think it's very different from using social media, which has a whole different communication style within it. So very much if you're using something like video chat or emailing somebody directly, it's a direct conversation that you're having with that person. So social media is something different, and I think there is always a caution with using social media. Yes, certainly for loneliness, in terms of, yeah, I think it can heighten your experience of loneliness and alienation, and also your mental health in general as well. Research time and time again shows that social media can have quite a negative impact on our mental health. Like lots of things can have a negative impact on our mental health. And it's not to say to people, don't use social media, shut down all your accounts, but use it very sparingly. Use it in a wise way where you have control over it, where you're maybe not sitting on it for hours at an end each day, or waiting on kind of responses and likes and that type of thing. This again, loneliness and how we understand loneliness goes back to this discrepancy, within ourselves about, how we perceive our relationships. And social media can quite often distort how we perceive our relationships in a very false way, where it can look very positive out there and then more negative in here, and it kind of again goes back to shifting our response. So it does in a more negative way, where we might then start to believe other people are having more better relationships than us, but that might be an illusion that's created by social media. Again, it's a kind of about the beliefs, the thoughts, the appraisals we have about our loneliness that can then make that loneliness a lot more intense for us, or alleviate that loneliness as well. So again, I would caution with social media usage.
Social media sort of seems to be a platform that, increasingly people are able to share their innermost thoughts, feelings, for good and bad. Do you think that's reflective of our society in so much as we're becoming better at expressing our feelings, where perhaps in the past culturally we weren't encouraged to do that?
It's a good question. Yes and no. I think, it's one thing expressing your emotions, but it's not just as simple as just getting it out there. It's how you get it out there and who with as well. So for an absolutely ludicrous example, if you were just to run down the street shouting how you feel, that wouldn't be very useful for you. In fact, that would be a very damaging experience probably to go through. Whereas if you're talking with somebody that you have a close, trusted relationship with, family, friends, your partner, whoever that might be, it has a different function of communication, where really what you're saying is thought about by the other person. And that's kind of key in this, that we think about each other's mental states, and then have that reflected back to you or mirrored back to you, can be useful for, again, kind of maintaining this sense of yourself, and that will then help you to develop and help you to deal with your experience of loneliness.
Thanks, Brent. We're almost at the end of the session. We've got one more question here that I'd like to ask before we finish. And it's, does seeing someone on a video call have a bigger impact on combating loneliness than just a phone call? And if so, why?
Very good question. I think there's a lot of research being done into this, and certainly a lot of thought being given to this as we've been accelerated into using more and more means of digital communication and so forth. What I would say to that is, regardless if it's the telephone or a video chat, it's how the person experiences that. So if you have a preference for the phone or a preference for the video, then that's what's important. But I think it's also, again, regardless of what medium you use. It's about the quality of that interaction, and trying to facilitate that emotional conversation about maybe feeling lonely, and whether that can be received, thought about, and that sort of a dialogue between the people involved can be established. So again, it's about the individual experience. I know that there is some issues with kind of video calls and things like that, leading to more tiredness effects when communicating over the phone. But other than that, I would have to say, yeah, it would be down to the individual's experience and forming that meaningful connection with someone else.
Look, Brent, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. That's been incredibly insightful, and I hope that for people tuning in and asking questions, it's provided some level of reassurance and support during what has been a challenging time for everybody. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks also to everyone who has tuned in and been asking questions. The session will be going on YouTube over the next few days, and future sessions are going to be promoted in due course. So please keep an eye out on the Alumni Relations website and our social media channels as well for them. But until next time, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks again, Brent, and goodbye.
Thanks, Andy.